The night after Marcus saw Rachel pregnant on that quiet Portland street, he did not sleep, not even for a minute. He lay in his downtown apartment with all the lights off, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from passing cars slide across the white surface above him. His mind kept returning to that single moment at the traffic light when his entire world had shifted. The image of Rachel crossing the street, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly, played on repeat in his head like a film he could not pause or stop. The question that tormented him most was not whether the child was his. Deep down, in the part of himself he had been avoiding for 6 months, he already knew the answer. That baby was his daughter. The pregnancy Rachel had told him about in February, the one he had demanded she terminate, the one he had walked away from when she refused. She had never gotten the abortion. She had carried their child through every single day of the past 8 months, while he convinced himself the problem had disappeared. And that knowledge, that bone-deep understanding of what he had done, hurt more than the divorce papers ever had. Because for the first time in 34 years, Marcus felt something he had never truly experienced before. Real regret. Not the surface-level kind you feel when you miss a business opportunity or say something thoughtless at a party. This was the kind of regret that changes the entire architecture of who you are. The kind that makes you question every decision that led you to this moment. The kind that sits on your chest at 3 in the morning and makes it hard to breathe. Before we continue with what happened next, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For days after seeing Rachel, Marcus moved through his life like a ghost. He went to work, sat in meetings, responded to emails, but none of it felt real. His colleagues noticed something was wrong, but nobody asked. Marcus had always been the type of person who kept his personal life private, who presented a polished exterior no matter what was happening behind closed doors. But now, that exterior was cracking. He would find himself staring out his office window for 30 minutes at a time, losing entire chunks of the day to thoughts he could not control. He started replaying moments from his marriage that he had buried or dismissed. The night Rachel had cooked his favorite meal to celebrate his promotion, and he had come home 3 hours late without calling. The weekend she had asked him to stay home and spend time together, and he had chosen to play golf with clients instead. The evening she had tried to talk to him about feeling lonely in their marriage, and he had told her she was being dramatic. All those small moments of neglect that had seemed insignificant at the time now felt like warning signs he had been too self-absorbed to notice. He remembered the way Rachel used to look at him in their first years together, like he was someone worth believing in. And he remembered how that look had slowly faded, replaced first by disappointment, then by resignation, and finally by nothing at all. The indifference he had seen on her face that day at the traffic light haunted him more than anger ever could have. Anger meant she still felt something. Anger meant there was still some connection between them, even if it was painful. But indifference meant she had healed without him. It meant she had processed the loss of their marriage and moved forward into a life where he no longer mattered. That kind of emotional distance only comes from a heart that learned to survive without the person who broke it. Marcus realized that somewhere during these past 6 months, Rachel had stopped waiting for him to realize his mistake. She had stopped hoping he would come back. She had stopped thinking about him at all. And that realization cut deeper than anything else because it meant he had not just lost his marriage, he had lost the right to even exist in her thoughts. The divorce papers he had signed with such confidence, such certainty that he was making the right choice, now felt like the worst decision of his entire life. He had thrown away 7 years with a woman who had loved him genuinely and completely, and for what? For the illusion of freedom? For the convenience of not having to change his lifestyle? For the cowardice of not facing his own fears about fatherhood? Meanwhile, Rachel's life had transformed in ways Marcus could never have imagined. The woman he had left behind, the one who had cried when he moved out and looked so defeated when she signed the divorce papers, that woman no longer existed. In her place was someone fundamentally different, someone stronger, someone who had learned that she did not need a man to validate her worth or complete her life. Rachel had moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Portland, a place with tree-lined streets and neighbors who brought over casseroles and asked how she was feeling. The community she found there was the opposite of the isolation she had experienced in her marriage to Marcus. These people saw her pregnancy not as a problem to be solved, but as a gift to be celebrated. Her next-door neighbor, an older woman named Patricia who had raised 4 children as a single mother, checked on Rachel almost daily. The couple across the street had thrown her a baby shower that made Rachel cry happy tears for the first time in months. Her co-workers at the elementary school where she taught had been nothing but supportive, covering her classes when morning sickness hit hard and helping her prepare lesson plans for her maternity leave. Rachel's pregnancy was not a burden the way Marcus had framed it. It was her rebirth. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. The version of herself that had existed before she spent so much energy trying to make a broken marriage work. She laughed more easily now, finding joy in small moments like feeling the baby kick or setting up the nursery. She slept better too, no longer lying awake wondering why her husband preferred to be anywhere but home. She prayed with a depth she had not accessed in years, finding comfort in the belief that sometimes God closes doors that were never meant to stay open. And most importantly, she loved herself again. The constant self-doubt that had plagued her marriage, the nagging feeling that maybe if she was different or better Marcus would want to stay, all of that had evaporated. She understood now that his rejection had never been about her. It had been about his own fears and limitations. At her last doctor's appointment, the nurse had commented on how healthy Rachel looked, how her blood pressure was perfect and her energy levels strong. The doctor said she was glowing, that the stress that had been visible in her face 6 months ago had completely disappeared. When Rachel placed her hand on her belly at night before falling asleep, she would whisper to her daughter words she meant with every fiber of her being. "You saved me before you ever arrived." Because it was true. This baby had given Rachel a reason to choose herself, to walk away from a man who did not value her, to build a life based on what she wanted, rather than what she could settle for. But while Rachel bloomed, Marcus was falling apart. He could not stop thinking about her, could not stop wondering about the baby, could not stop imagining what his life would look like in a few months when his child was born, and he had no part in it. He started doing things that would have seemed crazy to anyone who knew about them. He drove past Rachel's neighborhood at night, parking several blocks away where she would not spot his car. He would sit there in the darkness, watching her house, sometimes catching glimpses of her moving past a window. He saw her one evening walking slowly down the sidewalk, one hand on her lower back, the other cradling her belly, and the smile on her face was so genuine and peaceful that it physically hurt him to witness it. Each time he saw her like this, happy and thriving without him, he saw the family he had thrown away, the life he could have had if he had been brave enough to face his fears instead of running from them. Marcus found himself doing increasingly strange things. He went into a baby store one Saturday afternoon and bought a white wooden crib, spending over an hour picking out the perfect one. He brought it home and set it up in his spare bedroom, standing back to look at it, imagining his daughter sleeping there. Then reality crashed down on him and he disassembled the entire thing and returned it the next day. He bought tiny pink shoes from a boutique, held them in his hands for a week, then returned those too. He kept walking into baby stores and just standing there like a ghost, touching onesies and stuffed animals and blankets, things he had no right to buy because he had forfeited his role in this child's life. His friends told him to move on. His business partner said he needed to focus on work and stop dwelling on a marriage that was over. His brother told him there were plenty of other women out there and that he was young enough to start over completely. But how do you move on from a mistake that keeps breathing beside you? How do you forget about a child who exists because you failed her before she was even born? Marcus could not explain this to anyone because he had never told anyone the full truth about why his marriage ended. He had let people assume it was mutual incompatibility or irreconcilable differences. He had never admitted that he had left his pregnant wife, that he had demanded an abortion and walked away when she refused. The shame of that truth was too heavy to speak aloud, so he carried it alone, feeling it grow heavier with each passing day. He stopped going out with friends, he stopped dating, he stopped pretending everything was fine. His apartment, once a symbol of his freedom and fresh start, now felt like a prison. Every corner reminded him of what he had sacrificed for this empty independence. The silence that had once felt peaceful now felt suffocating. The freedom he had craved now felt meaningless. He had everything he thought he wanted, and none of what actually mattered. Then one morning in mid-September, Marcus found something in his mailbox that changed everything. It was a thick manila envelope with a return address from a law firm he did not recognize. His hands shook as he opened it, somehow knowing before he even looked inside that this had something to do with Rachel. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed and formal, with legal language that boiled down to a few devastating sentences. Rachel was formally notifying him that he was not required to participate in anything related to the child. There would be no requests for financial support beyond what the divorce settlement had already established. No involvement was expected or necessary. No contact would be pursued. The letter made it clear that Rachel had thought carefully about this decision and that she believed it was in the best interest of the child to be raised without the complication of a father who had already demonstrated he did not want to be involved. At the very bottom of the page, beneath the lawyer's signature, there was a single handwritten line in Rachel's familiar script. "This child deserves peace, not the world we had." Marcus read those words over and over until they blurred. Then he sank to the floor of his apartment, his back against the door, and let out a sound he did not recognize as coming from himself, a raw, broken sob that came from somewhere deep inside, where he kept all the feelings he usually suppressed. Because that handwritten note made him realize something he had not fully understood until that moment. Rachel was not trying to punish him. She was not keeping him away from their daughter out of spite or revenge. She was protecting the baby from him. She had looked at the man he was, at the choices he had made, at the way he had abandoned them both, and decided that her daughter would be better off without that kind of father in her life. And the most painful part was that Marcus could not even argue with that assessment. What kind of father walks away from his pregnant wife? What kind of man demands that a woman terminate her pregnancy because it is inconvenient for his career? What kind of person signs divorce papers and then spends 6 months convincing himself that the problem has been solved? Marcus had been that kind of man. He had been selfish, cowardly, and cruel. And now he was paying the price for those choices. His daughter was going to be born in a matter of weeks, and he had no right to be part of her life. Not because of a legal restriction or because Rachel was being vindictive, but because he had proven himself unworthy of that role. He sat on the floor for hours, still holding that letter, feeling the full weight of what he had done and what he had lost. 3 days later, something happened that forced Marcus to face even more consequences of his actions. His mother called and asked to come over, saying she needed to talk to him about something important. Marcus agreed, assuming she wanted to discuss an upcoming family event or maybe ask for help with something around her house. When she arrived, her face was set in an expression Marcus had never seen before. She sat down on his couch, folded her hands in her lap, and asked him a direct question. Was it true that Rachel was pregnant with his child? Marcus felt his stomach drop. He asked how she knew. His mother explained that she had run into Rachel's sister Emily at the grocery store, and Emily, assuming Marcus had told his family about the pregnancy, had mentioned how brave Rachel was being through everything. When Marcus's mother expressed confusion, the whole truth had come out. Now she sat in Marcus's apartment, waiting for him to explain himself. Marcus told her everything. The pregnancy announcement, the arguments, the abortion demand, the divorce. The months of silence. Seeing Rachel on the street and realizing she had kept the baby, his mother did not interrupt, but he could see her expression changing as he spoke. When he finished, she did not say anything for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked toward the door. Marcus asked where she was going, and she turned back to look at him with an expression that broke something inside him. She said she needed time to process what he had told her, because the son she thought she raised would never have done something like this. His mother did not speak to him for 3 days. No phone calls, no text messages, nothing. On the 4th day, she finally called and asked him to come to her house. When Marcus arrived, she was in the kitchen making tea, her movements slow and deliberate. She poured 2 cups, sat down across from him at the table, and said something that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. "You did not just lose a wife," she said. "You are losing your bloodline. You are going to have a daughter out there in the world who does not know you, who will grow up without a father because you were too afraid to be one. That is your legacy now. That is what you chose." Marcus tried to respond, tried to explain or defend himself, but his mother held up her hand to stop him. She told him that she had adored Rachel, had loved her like her own daughter, and had been heartbroken when they divorced without understanding why. Now that she knew the truth, she understood perfectly. Rachel had been protecting herself and her baby from a man who had shown he was not capable of unconditional love. And while Marcus's mother said she would always love her son, she could not look at him the same way anymore. For the first time in his life, Marcus saw disappointment in his mother's eyes. Real, deep disappointment. Not the temporary kind you feel when someone forgets your birthday or makes a thoughtless comment. This was the kind of disappointment that comes from watching someone you believed in reveal themselves to be fundamentally less than what you thought they were. Marcus broke down crying right there at his mother's kitchen table, sobbing like he had not cried since he was a child. His mother let him cry without offering comfort, and somehow that made it worse. The distance between them in that moment felt insurmountable. That conversation with his mother was a turning point. Marcus realized he could not keep living with this weight, could not keep pretending he could simply move on and forget about what he had done. He needed to try, even if Rachel rejected him, even if she told him to stay away forever. He at least needed her to know that he understood the magnitude of his mistake. So he sat down and wrote her a letter. Not a long one. Not pages of excuses or explanations. Just a few simple sentences. "Rachel, I am not asking for forgiveness because I know I do not deserve it. I am not asking to be part of your life because I know I gave up that right. I am just asking for a chance to be a better man, even if it is only from far away. Even if you never let me meet our daughter, I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away, and I will spend the rest of my life living with that knowledge." Marcus read the letter a dozen times before sealing it in an envelope. Then he drove to Rachel's neighborhood, parked down the street, walked to her front door when he knew she was not home, and taped the envelope there where she would find it. He did not wait for a response. He did not knock or try to see her. He just left the letter and drove away, his heart pounding. 2 days later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Rachel stepped outside to pick up a package that had been delivered to her porch. That was when she noticed the white envelope taped to her door. She recognized Marcus's handwriting immediately. Her first instinct was to throw it away without reading it. She had spent months building a life without him and did not want to let him back into her head, but something made her open it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the pregnancy hormones that made everything feel more emotional. Maybe some small part of her that still remembered loving him. She stood on her porch and read his short message, the words so simple and direct that they cut through all her defenses. Then she read it again. And again. Finally, she sat down on the porch steps and let herself cry. Not because she wanted Marcus back. Not because she was reconsidering her decision to raise this baby alone. She cried because she finally understood something that had eluded her for months. Marcus was not the villain anymore. He was just a broken man who had finally realized what he had thrown away. He was someone who would have to live the rest of his life knowing he had failed at the most important moment. And while that did not change anything about her path forward, it did bring her a strange sense of closure. She had wondered sometimes if Marcus even thought about her anymore, if he felt any regret about what had happened. Now she knew. He did. He was suffering. He understood what he had lost. That knowledge did not heal all her wounds or make her forgive him completely, but it helped her let go of the anger she had been carrying. Her happiness was no longer tied to his healing or his redemption. She had found peace on her own. But knowing he was trying to find his own peace made it easier to release the last threads of bitterness she had been holding on to. A week later, Rachel did something that surprised even herself. She sent Marcus a text message. Just 3 words. Coffee. Saturday. Noon. Then she listed the name of a cafe near her house. Marcus responded within seconds, just typing, "Yes, and thank you." That Saturday, Rachel arrived at the cafe a few minutes early and chose a table near the window where the light was soft. She wore a comfortable dress that accommodated her belly and moved slowly as she sat down. When Marcus walked in, he looked like he had aged years in the months since she had last seen him up close. There were dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. He spotted her immediately and crossed the cafe quickly, then seemed to catch himself and slow down, approaching more carefully. He stood beside the table for a moment, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. "You look beautiful," he said. It was not a line or a manipulation. It was just the truth. Rachel was beautiful, glowing with the health of a successful pregnancy, her skin clear and her eyes calm. She nodded in acknowledgement of his compliment, but did not return it. There was a long silence as Marcus sat down across from her. He seemed to be struggling to find words, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. Finally, he cleared his throat and asked the question that had been consuming him for weeks. "Is there any place for me in this child's life?" His voice broke slightly on the word child, and Rachel could see he was fighting back. Tears. She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face and seeing genuine remorse there. She thought about all the things she could say, all the ways she could punish him or push him away or make him feel even worse than he already did. But Rachel was tired of carrying anger. She was tired of letting the past control her present. So instead, she gave him an answer that was both honest and merciful. "A place," she said slowly. "Yes, but not the one you were born for, the one you earn." She explained that he would never be her husband again. That chapter was closed and would never reopen. But if he was genuinely committed to being a father, if he could prove through consistent actions over time that he was reliable and present and emotionally healthy, then she would not prevent him from having a relationship with their daughter. She told him it would not be easy. That trust had to be rebuilt from absolute zero. That she would be watching carefully to see if his remorse was genuine or just temporary guilt that would fade once things got hard. She said she was doing this not for him but for their daughter, because every child deserves a chance to know their father if that father is willing to do the work required. When Rachel finished speaking, Marcus started crying. Not quiet tears, but full, shaking sobs that drew looks from other people in the cafe. He covered his face with his hands and cried like a man who had been holding everything in for too long. Rachel did not reach out to comfort him. She simply sat there, one hand on her belly, and let him feel whatever he needed to feel. After Marcus composed himself, they talked for another hour. Rachel explained her boundaries clearly. He would not be present for the birth. That moment was hers and hers alone, shared with people who had supported her through the pregnancy. But after the baby was born and Rachel had time to adjust to motherhood, she would let him know when he could meet his daughter. From that point forward, his involvement would depend entirely on his behavior. If he showed up consistently, if he was reliable and respectful, if he put the baby's needs ahead of his own ego, then he could gradually build a relationship with her. But if he disappeared again, if he proved inconsistent or selfish, Rachel would not give him another chance. This was it, his one opportunity to choose differently than he had chosen before. Marcus listened to every word, nodding, absorbing the weight of what she was offering. When she was done laying out her expectations, he thanked her in a voice still thick with emotion. He told her he knew he did not deserve this chance, but that he would not waste it. He said he would prove to her and to their daughter that he had changed. Rachel did not respond to that. Only time would prove whether his words matched his actions. As she stood to leave, moving slowly because of her size, Marcus stood too. He looked like he wanted to hug her, or touch her belly, or say something profound. But he did not. He just watched her walk out of the cafe, understanding that the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. She was not his wife anymore. She was not even really his friend. She was the mother of his child and someone who held the power to either include him in his daughter's life or exclude him completely. That reality was humbling in a way nothing else had been. When Rachel walked out of that cafe, she felt lighter than she had in months. She had been carrying the weight of anger and hurt for so long that it had become background noise in her life. But sitting across from Marcus, seeing his genuine remorse, and offering him a path forward, had released something inside her. She had forgiven him. Not because he deserved it, not because what he did was okay, but because holding on to bitterness was poisoning her own peace. She had forgiven him to free herself, not to free him. That distinction was important. Marcus would still have to live with the consequences of his choices. He had still missed 8 months of his daughter's development, still abandoned his wife when she needed him most, still caused pain that left permanent marks. Forgiveness did not erase any of that, but it did allow Rachel to move forward without constantly looking back. As she drove home that afternoon, she placed her hand on her belly and felt her daughter moving, those little kicks and rolls that had become familiar. She whispered to her the same thing she whispered every night: "We are going to be okay." And she meant it. Not because Marcus had apologized, or because he might be part of their lives going forward. She meant it because she had built a life that did not require his presence or approval. She had friends who loved her. She had a job she valued. She had a community that supported her. She had faith that carried her through difficult moments. And most importantly, she had herself. She had learned to trust her own judgment, to value her own worth, to choose her own happiness. That was a gift no one could take away. For Marcus, watching Rachel leave that cafe was one of the hardest moments of his life. Not because she was walking away, but because he understood that he was no longer the most important person in her life. He was barely even on the periphery. Everything she had built over these past months, she had built without him, and she had done a beautiful job of it. The woman he had married had been somewhat dependent on him, looking to him for decisions and validation. The woman walking away from him now needed nothing from him except consistency for their daughter's sake. That transformation was both inspiring and devastating. Marcus sat at that table for a long time after Rachel left, thinking about the road ahead. He knew she was giving him a chance most people would not have given. He knew her offer came from a place of grace he had not earned, and he knew that this was his last opportunity to become the kind of man his daughter would never have to heal from. That phrase kept echoing in his head. The kind of man his daughter would never have to heal from. He had to become someone reliable, present, emotionally available, and consistent. Someone who showed up not just when it was convenient, but especially when it was hard. Someone who put his child's needs ahead of his own ego and comfort. Marcus had no idea how to be that person because he had never been forced to before. But he was going to figure it out, one day at a time, one choice at a time, because the alternative was unthinkable. Over the following weeks, Marcus began the slow, difficult work of changing who he was. He found a therapist who specialized in helping people process regret and shame. He attended sessions twice a week, talking through all the ways he had failed and all the fears that had driven those failures. He joined a support group for fathers navigating complex custody situations, even though his situation was not exactly custody but rather the fight to have any relationship at all with his child. He read books about child development and parenting. He volunteered at a community center that helped single mothers, not to ease his guilt, but to understand what Rachel had been going through. He watched the women who came in for resources, saw how hard they worked to provide for their children, and gained new appreciation for the strength it took to parent alone. Most importantly, Marcus stopped running from his mistakes and started owning them completely. When his friends asked how he was doing, he told them the truth. When his mother checked in, he updated her honestly about his therapy progress. When people at work asked about his personal life, he no longer gave vague answers about the divorce. He simply said he was working on becoming a better man so he could be a father to the daughter he had almost lost forever. That level of honesty was uncomfortable and exposing, but it was necessary. Marcus could not change without first accepting who he had been. And then one night in early October, Marcus's phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was calm, but different somehow. She was in labor, she told him. She had been at the hospital for 6 hours already, and things were progressing. She was not calling to invite him to be there. She had made it clear he would not be present for the birth. She was calling simply to let him know that his daughter would likely be born sometime in the next 12 hours. Marcus thanked her for telling him, his voice shaking. After they hung up, he did not know what to do with himself. He paced his apartment for hours, checking his phone constantly, unable to focus on anything else. At 2 in the morning, Rachel's sister Emily sent him a text. A girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Everyone is healthy. That was all. No picture, no invitation to visit, just the basic information. Marcus read that text over and over, tears streaming down his face. He had a daughter. She was here. She was real, and he was not there to meet her. The pain of that absence was sharper than anything he had ever felt. But he also understood he had no right to be there. This was the consequence of walking away 8 months ago. This was what it meant to have to earn rather than automatically receive. 2 days after his daughter was born, Marcus received another text from Emily with a single photo attached. The baby was wrapped in a pink blanket, her tiny face peaceful in sleep, a small knit cap on her head. Underneath, Emily had written just one word: Emma. His daughter's name was Emma. Marcus stared at that photo for hours, memorizing every detail of her face. She looked perfect and fragile and impossibly small. He saved the photo as his phone's wallpaper and found himself looking at it constantly throughout the day. He wanted to meet her so badly it physically hurt, but he waited. He gave Rachel space. He did not push or demand or try to force his way into a moment he had forfeited the right to experience. 3 weeks went by. Then a month. Marcus kept going to therapy, kept working on himself, kept proving through his actions that he was serious about change even though no one was watching. And then one afternoon, his phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice sounded tired but also somehow lighter. She asked if he wanted to come meet Emma tomorrow afternoon. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. He said yes, his voice breaking. Rachel gave him the address and a time. 2 o'clock. Don't be late, she said. Marcus assured her he would be early. After they hung up, Marcus sat on his couch and cried tears of gratitude and fear and hope all mixed together. Tomorrow he would meet his daughter for the first time. Tomorrow his life would change again, but this time in a way that might redeem some of what he had destroyed. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived at Rachel's house at 1:30, a full 30 minutes early. He sat in his car, too nervous to go to the door yet. He had bought a small stuffed elephant the night before, soft and safe for a baby. At exactly 2 o'clock, he walked to the door and knocked softly. Rachel answered, looking exhausted but calm. She had Emma in her arms, and for the first time, Marcus saw his daughter in person. She was even more beautiful than in the photo, tiny and perfect with a little fist curled near her face. Rachel invited him inside and they sat in the living room. There was an awkward silence before Rachel asked if Marcus wanted to hold her. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Rachel showed him how to support Emma's head and carefully transferred the warm, small bundle into his arms. Marcus looked down at his daughter's sleeping face and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his child. His daughter. The baby he had tried to convince Rachel to terminate. If Rachel had listened to him, Emma would not exist. This perfect little person would never have drawn breath. The magnitude of that hit Marcus so hard he started crying right there, tears falling onto the blanket Emma was wrapped in. He whispered an apology to his daughter, knowing she could not understand but needing to say it anyway. He told her he was sorry for not wanting her, for not being there, for failing her before she was born, and he promised her something he meant with every fiber of his being. He would spend the rest of his life trying to be the father she deserved. Rachel watched this scene from across the room, and something in her expression softened just slightly. This did not erase what Marcus had done. It did not give him back what he had lost. A fragile, tentative beginning of something that might, with time and work and consistency, become healing for all of them. What would you do if you were Rachel? Could you offer someone a second chance after they abandoned you when you needed them most? And if you were Marcus, would you have the strength to keep showing up, knowing the road to redemption would be long and painful? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know how this story resonates with you. And if this touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the stories that challenge us most are the ones we need to sit with longest. Thank you for watching. In our next video, we will explore another powerful true story about love, loss, and the choices that define who we become.